Imagine this. You wake up to the sound of boots outside your door. Soldiers barge in, armed and cold-eyed. They say your land is no longer yours. You have 15 minutes to leave. No time to pack, no time to explain to your children. Outside, your neighbors are being dragged from their homes. There's crying, screaming, confusion, and then silence. Because no one dares to resist. This wasn't a war. This wasn't justice. This was removal at the barrel of a gun. Over 60,000 Native Americans were forcibly marched from their homelands, and thousands died before they ever reached the end of the road. Children, elders, entire families. This is the story America refuses to confront. This is the Trail of Tears. Long before the forced marches, Native nations had lived on their lands for thousands of years. The Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole peoples had villages, governments, cultures, and traditions deeply tied to the land. But in the 1800s, settlers wanted that land, especially for cotton plantations, and the U.S. government, under President Andrew Jackson, gave them what they wanted. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was passed. It allowed the government to exchange native lands in the east for lands west of the Mississippi River. They called it voluntary. But what kind of choice is it when the other option is violence? Most tribes resisted. Through petitions, through court cases, through diplomacy. The Cherokee Nation even went to the U.S. Supreme Court and won. In Worcester v. Georgia, the court ruled that the Cherokee were a sovereign nation and had the right to their land. But President Jackson ignored the ruling. He reportedly said, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." With the stroke of a pen and the backing of troops, native sovereignty was erased. Land that had belonged to these nations for centuries was suddenly available for white settlers. And so began the forced removal, what we now call the Trail of Tears. The march begins, brutal reality. They were herded like cattle. Entire villages, men, women, children, elders, forced to leave everything behind. A few blankets, a handful of cornmeal, whatever they could carry on their backs. They were told the journey would be short. They were told the government would provide food and wagons. They were lied to. Over 1,000 miles through mud, snow, rain, and rivers. No proper clothes, no winter boots, no medicine. At first, some tried to walk with dignity. By the end, dignity didn't matter. Survival did. Children fell first. Small legs couldn't handle the endless walking. When a child collapsed, mothers tried to carry them. But when they grew too weak, when the child stopped breathing, the mother would be forced to lay her child on the side of the road and walk away. If she refused, soldiers pointed muskets at her head. Old men and women, too frail to move fast, were left to die where they fell. Fever and dysentery spread like wildfire in the camps where they slept, if they slept at all. The rations rotted. Water was contaminated. Hunger gnawed through every breath. Fathers who once hunted for their families were now begging soldiers for scraps. And still, the march continued. The soldiers didn't treat them like people. They treated them like obstacles. Anyone who stopped too long, anyone who collapsed, was whipped, beaten, or shot. The snow turned red with blood. Mothers wept quietly, clutching tiny shoes or locks of hair they couldn't bear to leave behind. By the time they reached the so-called Indian Territory, what is now Oklahoma, over 4,000 Cherokee were dead. The others were barely alive, sick, starving, broken. This wasn't just suffering. It was a slow extermination, sanctioned by law, enforced by soldiers, fueled by greed. And yet history books called it a necessary movement. A sad chapter. It wasn't sad, it was a crime. And the land itself still remembers. Betrayal of the Cherokee. What makes this tragedy even more unbearable is that the Cherokee tried to do everything right. They didn't resist violently. They adapted, they negotiated, they tried to coexist. They formed a government modeled after the United States. They had a written constitution. They established schools. They printed a newspaper in their own language. Some even adopted Christianity, believing that assimilation might protect them. They trusted the courts. When Georgia tried to seize their land, the Cherokee took their case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in 1832, in Worcester v. Georgia, the court ruled that the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign entity. The law was on their side, but none of that mattered. Andrew Jackson refused to enforce the ruling. The President of the United States ignored the highest court in the land, and so justice was crushed under boots. The treaties were worthless. The promises, empty. To the U.S. government, the Cherokee were no longer neighbors. They were an inconvenience standing in the way of land and wealth. Even within their own leadership, the Cherokee were divided. A small group, desperate to avoid bloodshed, signed the Treaty of New Echota, giving up their lands in exchange for promises of safe passage and aid. But it wasn't signed by the elected Cherokee government. It wasn't approved by their people. It was signed in secret and used as an excuse to legitimize the removal. And so betrayal came not just from outside, but from within. The U.S. Congress ratified the treaty by just one vote. One vote, and thousands were condemned to die. This wasn't just displacement. It was the collapse of trust, of justice, of any illusion that native lives had value in the eyes of the American state. The Cherokee had followed the law. They believed in the system, and the system destroyed them anyway. When the marches ended, the suffering didn't. The survivors of the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, arrived in what was then called Indian Territory. But there were no homes waiting, no farmland, no compensation, just a desolate, unfamiliar land, and the haunting memory of everything they lost. Entire nations had been uprooted, communities fractured, elders and knowledge lost forever. Languages that had survived for centuries began to fade. Sacred sites, burial grounds, homelands, all left behind or destroyed. The psychological scars didn't disappear. They were passed down, generation to generation. Today, many Native communities still live with the legacy of that trauma. Poverty, displacement, loss of land, loss of language, health crises, mental health struggles, and systemic neglect. And it's not just historical. Even now, Native American reservations face higher rates of suicide, unemployment, and disease than almost any other group in the U.S. And much of it traces back to this. The government removed their roots and never let them grow back. And while the United States has apologized in carefully worded statements, there has never been justice. No land returned, no reparations, no major memorials in Washington, D.C. Ask the average American what the Trail of Tears was. Many won't even know it happened. And that silence, that forgetting, it's a second erasure. Because genocide doesn't always end with death. Sometimes it continues through neglect, through indifference, through forgetting. The pain didn't end in the 1830s, it just went quiet. Why it's erased from American memory. Ask a child in school what the Trail of Tears was. If it's even mentioned, they'll say something vague. A sad time when Native Americans were moved west. That's how textbooks describe it. Moved. Like it was a choice. Resettled. Like it was peaceful. For their own good. But that's not what happened. It was forced removal, it was suffering, it was death. And yet America wrapped it in softer language to hide the brutality behind policy. Why? Because to tell the truth means facing what this country was built on. It means acknowledging that genocide didn't just happen far away. It happened here, under a democratic government with paperwork and military orders. It means admitting that one of the men carved into Mount Rushmore, Andrew Jackson, was responsible for it. That a president ignored the law, violated treaties, and caused the death of thousands. And we still call him a hero in many history books. This isn't an isolated event. It's part of a long pattern of breaking treaties, stealing land, and then erasing the memory of those crimes. No national day of mourning, no major federal memorial in D.C., just silence. It's easier to celebrate freedom when you bury the people you stole it from. But silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. And forgetting is just another form of violence. The Trail of Tears isn't just about what happened. It's about what's been hidden and why. The Trail of Tears didn't end in Oklahoma. It still runs through this country, not in footsteps, but in silence. It runs through every broken treaty, every erased name, every forgotten burial ground under shopping malls and suburbs. It lives in the generational trauma of Native families, in the children growing up on reservations with no clean water, no schools, no justice. It lives in the textbooks that refuse to tell the truth, and in the monuments that honor the men who caused this pain. But here's the truth. You cannot build a just future on lies, and you cannot claim to honor freedom while ignoring the people you crushed to take it. The Trail of Tears is not just Native history. It is American history, and until it's acknowledged, honored, and taught, it will remain a wound that never heals. So don't look away. Share this story, talk about it, teach it, say their names, Because remembrance is resistance, and truth is a form of justice. It's time we stop burying what this land remembers.